Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first of our evenings with the IFCA's virtual forums. We are delighted that so many of you have chosen to be with us this evening. And I must say it was interesting watching your names drop in as you joined the event, because there are quite a number of you I either know, have known in the past and have worked with in the past, or at least I know your names from emails and various social media things. So welcome to all of you. So these events are an opportunity for the Angling Trust to bring together the IFCAs with the local sea angling community in order to hear what the IFCAs have done and are doing on behalf of anglers, and for you, the angling community, to ask questions of the IFCAs. So tonight we're delighted to welcome Sam Davis, the Chief Officer of the Cornwall IFCA, to present to you this evening. As Nevin said, many of you have submitted questions in advance, and we will be doing our best to ensure that as many of your questions as possible are answered this evening. So we hope you enjoy this evening and find it both informative and helpful. And please provide any feedback to Nevin after the event about improvements you think we can make. We're always happy to hear those. And please keep your eye out for details of our future forums, including the other evenings with the IFCAs and the themed events, the next of which is the spotlight on poor beagle sharks on the 11th of March. So without further ado, I will thank you all again for attending this evening. I'll hand you back to Nevin, who will then hand over to Sam, and I hope you enjoy the event. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, David. Patrick, very nice to see you, but can I ask you to turn your camera off, please? We just want to focus on the speaker, if that's possible, please. You've just joined us, so that's great. So we just got Sam. Okay, thanks for that. Okay, look, I'm going to hand over to Sam Davis from Cornwall IFCA. Thanks for joining us tonight, and Sam's going to share a presentation with you shortly. So again, thank you for joining us tonight, Sam, and if you'd like to carry on.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. And thanks for that introduction as well, David. I thought it was quite interesting watching all the familiar names and faces coming in as well. There's quite an IFCA party out there. There's quite a lot of my colleagues. There's also some of my committee members, old and new, and a lot of faces and names that either I've met or recognise. So thank you for taking the time to be here tonight. So I'm going to talk to you for about 20 minutes or so about what we do and about our IFCA work. And then I'm going to stop for about 10 minutes to take some questions, as Nevin suggested. And then I'm going to return to the further topics that I've got for you this evening. Now, inevitably, a lot of this is going to be about bass. So Nevin kindly shared some of the questions beforehand. So I know there's a lot of interest in bass. I'm going to talk about bass in the second part of my presentation. So if you have questions about bass, if you can sort of hold those back until that bit, that would be fantastic. I'm going to talk a lot more about the subject then, because it's clearly of concern and of interest to a lot of people. So I'm going to share my screen with you now. And I hope you can all see that. Nevin, maybe you'd like to let me know that everybody can see that.
Yeah, I can certainly see it, Sam. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much. So, as I said, I'm going to talk about IFCA work and about what Cornwall IFCA does. And I'm going to explain a little bit about that, because whilst I'm aware that a lot of people dialed in today probably know a lot about us, there will be people who don't. And I think it's useful if everybody has the same level of understanding. So if you're an old hand at this, you've seen me talk loads of times, I'm sorry, you're going to see some slides you've seen before, and you're going to hear some words you've heard before. For other people, I hope it's helpful. I've tried to condense it down as much as I possibly can. Bearing in mind that the most important thing tonight is that you've got the opportunity to ask some questions. So like I said, there'll be a 10-minute break, and then we'll go back in, talk about bass and some of the other issues that I know will be of interest to you. So A bit of background. As Nevin and David have explained, this is the first of a series of talks with myself and colleagues from around the coast. And there's 10 of us around the coast, and we vary, as you can see on that slide, from very small, so our cousins out in the west, in the Scillies, 2 of them out there, right the way across to the east, in the Eastern District, where there's a vast workforce of 28 of them. So we're still pretty small organisations, and across England in total, there's only between about 135, 140 of us. But that's not 135, 140 people out on the coast doing enforcement. That includes all our admin staff, that includes our scientific staff, and each of the IFCAs has got a strong scientific element to their work. I'll explain a bit more about that later. Some of us have people that work on policy. Those of you who've spoken to us in Cornwall a lot will know I've got a policy officer called Ben who deals with a lot of the angling work. So it's not a lot of people, and it's a pretty big sea area, about 26,000 kilometres squared. And in order to cover that, we have to be pretty thrifty, and we have to be, fairly light on our feet. So across the whole 10 IFCAs, we get about £6 million from local authorities. So in our case, in Cornwall, that comes just from Cornwall Council. Our colleagues up in the northeast have something like 14 local authorities. So again, it does vary tremendously. The rest of our money comes from DEFRA, and that's allocated to us either every year or every couple of years. Still waiting for confirmation of that at the moment, but hopefully everything's going to be okay. So part of our work is very locally faced, and part of our work is probably more nationally faced, and that does get reflected somewhat in our funding. But it was just to give you an idea of scale. Some of you may also hear about the Association of IFCAs, so that's our representative body. Sounds very grand. It's actually one of our ex-chief officers, Rob Clark. He does a lot of work on our behalf, advocating, working with people like DEFRA, working with the Angling Trust, as I know he has. And he represents us often at a national level, but occasionally myself and my other IFCA chief officer colleagues, or their counterparts, either in their enforcement side or their research side. Basically, the best person on the day gets to do it. So for some of you, you might have seen our enforcement officers out on the road, you might have been boarded by them, you may have encountered our research officers or met some of us at conferences. But there's actually not that many of us in total. So I thought it just important to make that point. So Cornwall, bringing it down to the local scale, and as we're the first of these to start this tour off. For those of you who don't know us, we're based in Hale, or rather pre-COVID, we were based in Hale. Hale has now sort of disappeared under a massive great building site. It's difficult to see our office, but we're out in those offices out on the quay. We're all working from home at the moment, and I thought I'd probably best mention that. I can't see her anywhere. I've got a really old cat. She's 18 years old and stone deaf. Occasionally she starts howling. So and it's a completely open plan house, so I can't really do much about it. So if that happens, I do apologise. So here in Cornwall, we've got about 17 officers, give or take. We've got a couple off on parental leave at the moment, but they're split between our enforcement function and our scientific function predominantly. We have 3 officers permanently based on the patrol boat you see there. That's St Piran, who is moored in Newlyn. The yellow vessel on the right-hand side of the slide is Tiger Lily. She's over in Myla. She's an Exeter charter boat, so some of you, if anyone's from the sort of Portland area, you might recognise her. And the other 2 ribs are sort of interchangeable, Lioness on the left and Avalon on the right. They both fit into the stern of St Piran. So we have a spare for when things go wrong, which inevitably they do. So that's the kind of scale of our IFCA. About 1.2 million a year, which includes the DEFRA money and our money from Cornwall Council. And 4,800 kilometres squared of sea area. So again, there's quite a lot to cover. a lot of fisheries, and I'm sure all of you will be very familiar with the sort of diversity of fisheries that we have. So that's the, say, the operational side of what we do. But the other side of being an IFCA, and when people talk about the authority, they mean both bits of it. So the bit in blue at the bottom of the slide is basically us. It's the officers, the doing bit. The other side of an IFCA authority, and when people talk about authority members, they're talking about what would have been our committee members. And when we were sea fisheries committees, that's how people referred to them. They're now called authority members, which sounds very grand. And a lot of you, I recognise, dialing in there, have either sat in our meetings. And I have to say there's a couple of gentlemen here today who are probably the best attenders. In fact, they probably turn up more than some of our members. So you will have seen the people that sit on our authority at the moment. So those are a mixture of Cornwall councillors, a lot of whom have direct interests either in harbours or in angling, or interests through the wards that they represent. We also have general members. So those are the members who are appointed through a process with the MMO, and they are from recreational sea angling backgrounds, they're from commercial fishing backgrounds, academic backgrounds, conservation backgrounds. So they're a real mix. Different IFCAs will have a different mix depending on the fisheries in their area. And then on top of that, we have 3 officers from other organisations. So one of ours is here today. I saw Simon Tom signing in earlier, but also Natural England and the Environment Agency. So they have permanent seats. We have a couple of, we have a subcommittee and a working group. Other IFCAs do this differently. So if you go and see other IFCAs in the next few weeks and months, some of them have lots of different subcommittees for all sorts of stuff. So you're always writing papers. Ours is a bit of a simpler setup. It still feels like you're always writing papers for them, but essentially they're the people we work for. They're the ones that make the decisions. We produce the work, and they make the decisions based on that. So I just wanted that to be clear. So most people, when they think about what we do, they think about our enforcement job. That's where you might encounter us. You might have had somebody come up to you on a beach or out on the cliffs somewhere when you've been angling. If you've been on a boat, then maybe you've been on a charter boat and seen us. And a lot of our enforcement work traditionally has been done at sea. And certainly when I started years and years ago, it was all about being at sea, really. Don't even think we had, in fact, we didn't have any vehicles there. We had one Land Rover then, and that was it. We've gradually changed so that there's a lot more enforcement done from the cliffs, on the cliffs, in ports, in harbours, in premises, fish markets, etc. And increasingly remotely. So there's the starting of a shift from what you'd see in the bottom left-hand corner, which is sadly now Nige, who no longer works for us. He's retired, lucky bugger, talking to fishermen aboard their boat. So boarding work and enforcement work is also about talking to people. It's about finding out what's going on. It's about picking their brains. It's about understanding the fisheries that are within this area. You know, there's up to sort of 52 species caught in this area, as you all know as anglers. And for us, talking to people during our enforcement work is all part and parcel of it. It's a bad day if you have to get your pocketbook out and start taking notes, but predominantly it's about speaking to people. Often people might be pretty angry with you, but again, it's an exchange of information. But the enforcement job goes on at night, goes on during the day, goes on at weekends. A lot of people say, oh, we never see you at night. Well, it would be very crap if you could see us, really. So we are out there, not all the time. You know, back to having like 6 people. If they're out all night, all the time, then they're not at work during the day. So it's all of it is a balance. We assess by risk the kind of enforcement job we need to do, and then put our time and our money to that. Enforcement work inevitably ends up either being absolutely fine, no problems and you say goodbye, and that's the end of it, right the way through to going to Crown Court and everything in between. We have the ability to issue fixed administrative penalties, a bit like a speeding fine, but we also take people to court, to Magistrates Court and Crown Court. At the moment, obviously, all that's pretty delayed, and cases are taking a long time to get through. But essentially, every time we take a prosecution, we have to prepare a case file, even if it ends up being a written warning. So there's an awful lot of work that goes behind the scenes that, again, our enforcement officers do. So if you're an enforcement officer, you find something, you then have to write a case file up, you then have to take it to court. But the slide in the middle at the bottom was just to illustrate the fact that our work is changing. So you'll be familiar probably with the fact that the larger vessels, so for instance, that big green beamer there, have vessel monitoring systems, satellite trackers on them. There's a move to put inshore vessel monitoring systems based on the mobile phone network on the smaller vessels under 12 meters. And if you dial in and watch Matt Mander and his team next month, they'll talk about the IVMS system that they have in place in their district. That whole process nationally is moving slowly towards getting somewhere, and eventually I think we will be doing more remote monitoring, but remote monitoring is only as good as what you understand those vessels to be doing. So it's not the whole answer, it's a tool. And moving forwards from there, and I saw that our colleagues from Southern are dialed in, Sam Dell. Sam's been leading on a piece of work for the IFCAs around the use of drones and drone technology, and people within Southern IFCA and other IFCAs are training up to be drone pilots. So it's something also the MMO is looking at. So a lot of looking at new technology. How can we do this differently? How can we spread, again, those resources a little bit more widely? Because clearly you can't be everywhere all the time. So the enforcement side is probably quite familiar to you. Our research side may be less familiar to you. And I could have sort of spoken the whole evening on the kind of work that they do. So we have Tiger Lily, and those photographs there are taken aboard Tiger Lily. Like I said, your next charter boat. I've done some considerable work refitting and generally pimping her out for the use as a survey vessel, A-frames and winches and such like. And she's used for a variety of different pieces of work, generally remotes, what we call remote sensing. So dropping cameras, that sort of weird thing on the right-hand side that looks like a metal table is actually the camera setup and the lighting setup, and the umbilical cable there in yellow. We do a lot of work now like that, and it's a bloody skillful job landing a table on the seabed and taking photographs and getting that right. But we've got some really talented people that do it. But we also do things the old-fashioned way and actually get out on the shore, although increasingly this is changing. So that top slide was, God, going back must be what, maybe 10, 12 years. Out on the liner, ourselves and our colleagues at Devon and Severn decided we'd count all the crab tiles. There's a lot of crab tiles in the liner and the Tamar. There's even more crab tiles in the X, and I'm sure they'll talk about that next month rather. That took weeks of people's time. So the last few times we've done it with drones, other people flying the drones for us, but a lot faster. So whilst it was really good fun and saw bits of Cornwall I'd never seen, it's not an efficient use of time, and the technology and using the drones is great. And the gentleman on the left-hand side, that's some of our oyster fishermen. Apart from anything else, we're also responsible for the fowl, oyster and mussel fishery, and you will have probably heard quite a lot about that recently in the press in relation to Brexit and the export of live bivalve mollusks. But that's some of the fishermen there getting involved actually out on a survey, counting queens and counting mussels. So in terms of some of the work that we do, the remote sensing work, on the other slide, there was the insert picture also was one of our side scan sonar. So I thought I'd just drop these in out of interest because some of you would probably fish around these wrecks. The top left-hand one is the Volney, and you can see the boilers there very clearly. And the bottom right one is the Hera. So both on the south coast, sort of between the Lizard and the Dodman. So that's the sort of quality of imagery that we're collecting. And that imagery then is used to decide where you're going to position your camera, because otherwise dropping a camera down that's only the size of a table, you know, you've got to know where to put it. So this is the sort of work that we then do. And a lot of this is about habitat mapping. It's about trying to understand what's on the seabed, understand the impacts of fishing on it, particularly marine protected areas, look at its recovery, count how many things are there and how dense they are. And yeah, we're really good at this, and it's something that I'm really very proud of. So moving on, why would we count these things? Why would we gather all this evidence? What would we bring it all together? It's a complicated slide, but I try to keep it as simple as possible. But what I wanted to do here was just illustrate what we do in terms of making bylaws. So quite often an issue will come to us. So the issue in red there might be triggered by something local or something national, something that people might bring to us, something our officers might see. And our authority will go away and consider that and recommend to our bylaw working group, which is members of our authority, like a small subgroup, to go away and look further. And at that point, we get asked to go and gather data. So go and drop cameras at the manacles and have a look at it, or Whitsound Bay. Go and find out more about netting, etc. That information gets brought back, and eventually through a sort of process of that can go in many loops, we eventually get to drafting a bylaw. Now, we're not DEFRA and we're not the MMO. We don't have a big bylaw making team, drafting team, loads of lawyers. There's one person that does all this work, same person that runs the enforcement team. So that work kind of is quite all-consuming when it happens. Eventually, bylaws are drafted. They go to the authority. If the authority makes them, it then goes up to the blue formal consultation stage. So, as recreational sea anglers, you probably have been approached by us at a couple of stages, either at the informal consultation stage, where we're going out and asking people about what you think, what have you seen, what, you know, have you got any data? But then again, we have the formal consultation stage where people write in, raise objections or letters of support. All of that eventually goes off to the MMO. The MMO make a decision about whether they think it's good enough to proceed, a sort of quality assurance process, and it goes to DEFRA. And green box is DEFRA. That's the decision-making process. That's where bylaws are either made or confirmed. If they're made, happy days, we then start enforcing them, and about 5 years later we have to review them. If they're not made, not confirmed, we start all over again. So I just wanted to briefly show that to you, just to give you a flavour of how we do our job, and where all of that enforcement information and research information goes into the bit about making bylaws. So I'm going to stop there and take some questions from people, and then after the break we'll then talk about a little bit more about bylaws and about BAS.
Okay, Sam, thank you for that. I'll hand over now to Hannah. Hannah's on our campaigns team and has been monitoring the chat box. So Hannah, if you'd like to go through the chat box with the key questions you've picked out, please.
Thanks, Nevin, and thanks, Sam, for a brilliant first half. As Nevin's just explained, we're going to take questions on BAS after the second half. So if your questions miss out, I will come back to it, don't worry. So the first question is from John McMaster, who says, what in your view are the pluses and minuses of recreational sea anglers now being recognised in the Fisheries Act?
That's a good question. I think what it does is really state the government's intentions really clearly within the framework of the Act. So it places recreational anglers alongside commercial fishermen, but also alongside conservation interests. And clearly the management of the marine environment and the management of the fisheries is about looking at all those different pieces of the jigsaw. So I think it makes things really clear. Pluses and minuses. Well, IFCAs have had that blend of representation for the 10 years that we've been around. So for us, we're very much used to having debates where people might come from an angling perspective, might come from a commercial fishing perspective or a conservation perspective. And I think we're very lucky that we have some heated debates, but people take the time to listen. With that being very overt and explicit within the Fisheries Act, it also sets out an expectation that everybody will need to be involved in things like the development of fisheries management plans, which sit within the Fisheries Act and will be the end product of all of them. So for me, it gives, you know, a clear line of sight and a clear intention by DEFRA about what they want to do. And because I was going to be speaking to you tonight, I spoke to DEFRA earlier about a couple of things. And I would actually quote it, actually. If I can find what was said, I'll have to preface, summarize it otherwise. But I spoke to one of our DEFRA colleagues, and he was very clear about, here we go, you know, they really want to sort of collaborate with everybody. They want to be more engaged with everybody and have more of a partnership approach across all of those interest groups. And I expect some people here might have dialed into the all-party parliamentary group presentation that Secretary of State and Anne Freeman gave today. And that was the same message there. So long answer to a short question, but I think it sets out DEFRA's stall very clearly, and that will then come down through the rest of the fisheries management piece. Thanks, Hannah.
Thank you. The next question is from Malcolm, who says, Section 153 of the Marine and Coastal Access Act 2009 states that one of the duties for IFCAs is to take measures in order to rebuild, restore and recover damage that has occurred due to overexploitation. Given the decline of so many stocks over the last 4 years, do you believe IFCAs are willing to take this particular responsibility seriously, since to do so inevitably means short-term pain for user stakeholders?
Section 153 is at the heart of what we do. It kind of sets out all of our the sort of fundamental vision for what IFCAs do. So about rebuilding stocks, it also talks about balance. It talks about a viable industry. It talks about involvement of people in our work. And it is a difficult place to sit, and you know, Malcolm knows this. We've known each other for years. It's I think I find that basically whatever we do makes us unpopular with one or more of, you know, if you want to think about this sort of three main groups. Generally, if absolutely everybody is fed up with you, it probably means that what you're doing is about right, but that doesn't mean it's a comfortable place to be. And in terms of rebuilding stocks for the future, not just bass, because I'm sure you were thinking about bass, but shellfish, which is a major thing for the southwest and for Cornwall and Devon in particular. You know, there might have to be some really difficult decisions made there in terms of looking at effort and maybe other technical measures. And at a national level, the government, again, through the Fisheries Act, is going to have to take those same decisions at a much higher level about what can we do to improve the situation where it needs improving, and set, as you say, that short-term pain in some cases against or within the context of an economy that's in a difficult place and society that's in a difficult place. I have to say, I mean, I've been doing this job, God, a long time now. which is why I'm going grey and got lots of wrinkles. But this year has been the hardest year ever, and I think it's just going to get harder. So yeah, Section 153 is the heart of what we do, and I think when we first read it in a draft of the Marine and Fisheries Act, Marine and Coastal Assets Act, I think we all looked at one another and went, "Oh my goodness!" And in the afternoon we'll do world peace. I mean, it really is an ambitious project. We don't get it right all the time, but yeah, we return to it frequently. So thank you for your question, Malcolm. Hannah.
Thanks, Sam. So the next one is a two-parter from Bob Earl. He's asked two questions, and I've combined
Are you going to
them.
let him ask two questions? Come on, Bob.
I am. I think they're very potentially useful questions. So he says freshwater licenses pay into supporting fishing inland. Do you think this mechanism will work at sea? And anglers in freshwater situations also act increasingly as wardens. Is there a role for this model in the marine setting?
Right, let me just, we're getting to that time of one's life where if you don't write stuff down, you go straight out of your head. So one was about license fees and one was about voluntary bailiffs, essentially, I think is what you're asking there, Bob.
Yes.
So, yeah. So license fees. Well, it's kind of a question for the audience, really, as much as for me. The idea of a rod license in the marine environment has been discussed before, and I think there's a range of opinions about it. The revenue would be great if we could have more revenue. Certainly, the idea of the user paying is something that has been encapsulated within the Fisheries Act, but only for the MMO, not for ourselves. So the MMO will be able, through the Fisheries Act, to essentially bring in money from things like marine licensing. We haven't got that same power in the Fisheries Act. I mean, we don't really figure much in it because we sit in the Marine and Coastal Access Act. So with our EA colleagues would again be able to speak to this much better, but a license fee has got to be significant enough that it's not sort of negated by the cost of actually getting the license fee in, because that takes time, but with technology that should get better. Voluntary bailiffs. I know that Nevin and his colleagues have been speaking to our colleagues in our NIMEG group, which is basically our national enforcement group, where the colleagues that do that part of the job get together and talk about stuff. I think that moving forwards, trying to make reporting of possible offending behaviour would be, really valuable. And I was going to return to that in what I speak about later. In terms of the legislation involved and being able to master the range of it, that's a tall order, and there's people on this call who do that every day. I can't keep it in my head anymore. Again, that's probably my age, but there's a lot out there. So I think there's still scope in looking at it, but I think there's a step before that, which is about how can we encourage and make it easier for people to let us know what they've seen, what they've heard. And I don't think our IFCA is the best at that. I think there's probably other IFCAs that are much better, and I need to learn from them. And I'd be really interested to get some sort of feedback from people as to their thoughts on the matter as well. Thank you.
Sam, could I just come in there, Sam, and just make a couple of comments? 3.5 days a week I work on the freshwater side for the Angling Trust, and I coordinate the voluntary bailiff service across southwest England. Now, 2.5 years ago, I gave a presentation to the NIMEG, which was all of the IFCAs plus MMO and DEFRA and the like up in London, all about the voluntary bailiff service and how it works. And to a man and a woman, everybody that was there, they were very supportive of the principle of a voluntary bailiff service. And the great attraction with it is that you're using people with eyes and ears, to support and report. We now have nearly 500 and expanding to 700 in the freshwater across England, and are recognised increasingly by the Environment Agency as vital in the work that they do. No, they don't have any powers, but I think there's no doubt that the NIMEG and IFCAs would love, I think, on the bigger picture, to have something like this, a voluntary service run. But we do that on freshwater because we're funded via the Environment Agency, which comes out of rod licence money. So I'll just leave that as a thought for all of you. But these things cost. You can't get anything for nothing. Yeah, if I could hand back to Hannah now.
Thanks, Nevin.
Thanks, Nevin. So just a few more questions. I'm aware that we're getting close to the 10-minute mark. So Neil asks, what are the top 3 improvements that Cornwall IFCA intends to make to improve the quality of sea angling in Cornwall?
Gosh, that's a good one, isn't it? Top 3 improvements to the quality of sea angling. We, several years ago now, I suppose about 2 or 3 years ago, we brought in our river and estuarine netting bylaw. And I'd like to think that that has made a difference to the quality of angling. I know I'm cheating slightly because we're looking back to that, but it took a long time to get there. That is having a positive impact on people's angling pleasure within the estuaries around Cornwall. I think that in terms of bass, because we're going to get to talk about bass, there are questions around bass management, and I think we'll pick that up again in with relation to both Cornwall IFCA and I think kind of wider from the IFCAs. And I think we need to communicate better. We need to spend more time talking to anglers than we do. Our relationship in the last couple of years has been quite difficult, and it's difficult on both sides. There's been a lot of frustration from anglers, and I would say probably a lot of frustration from us. So I think if we can better understand what you do, but also better understand what you need as well, and have a situation, and I suppose this goes back to that earlier question about anglers being involved in a whole sort of fisheries management process. It's about better communication with you, and maybe also discussions around how we can work with you around things like gathering data as well. But I'll come back to that. So I hope that helps. Thank you, Hannah.
Thanks, Sam. I think we're running close to over 10 minutes now, so I'll hand back to yourself for part 2, and then we'll come back to some more questions later.
Okay.
Thank you.
No worries. Okay, so I am going to pick some notes up here because I've written loads of them. Right, this is the bit that we'll get down to the kind of things that people are interested in. So I wanted to touch on our work programme, just to illustrate the kind of things that IFCAs do, because whenever anyone phones us up, it's always because you've got an interest, whether you're an angler and you have an interest in, say, bass, whether you're a potter and you've got an interest in brown crab, whatever it happens to be, that the thing that you phoned up about is the thing that you want us to deal with, the thing that we must do. Why haven't we done it? And I do spend quite a lot of time talking to people about their particular interest and concern, but also to try and help people to understand that we've got quite a lot of those things all at the same time. So just to pull out some of the aspects of our work programme at the moment. I mentioned the river and estuarine netting bylaw. We're working on a coastal netting bylaw at the moment. The two things started simultaneously what feels like glacial time ago, and we're still working on them. This is for management of inshore nets to protect salmon and sea trout. So That process is moving forward this year, but it's been, again, a massive piece of work. Crustacean shellfish management plan. Appreciate, again, not of concern to yourselves, but of great concern to 300 odd shellfish permit holders within our district, and probably around 400, maybe 400 boats in total here and there. That fishery is absolutely key to the commercial fishing industry within Cornwall, and it's also the kind of heart of what makes Cornish harbours what they are, and has those knock-on effects wider than just fishing. But it's a hugely complex issue. We decided to go down the fisheries management plan route, and actually all of the IFCAs are working on fisheries management plans. Whether these fisheries management plans are going to fit with DEFRA's fisheries management plans are a question that we're exploring at the moment. But this brings together all of our data that we have, and we have a big data set on crustacean fisheries because we've been gathering permit data for years. So there's a first draft coming out very, very, very soon of that. Big piece of work. We actually had to take somebody on temporarily to do it because we just didn't have the capacity to write that in-house. I think it's weighing in at about 100 pages so far. That will then go out for working with stakeholders to try and develop things like harvest control rules about how you then use your data to manage a fishery. And out of that will then come a review of the bylaws that we have, and we've got a lot of bylaws for crustacean shellfish. Similar process for scallops. Scalloping is a very valuable fishery economically within our district and along the south coast, and we share some of our scallopers with our colleagues. They're nomadic coming down up and down the coast from Wales all the way around to Scotland. Scallops need managing like everything else, and a lot of the work we've done recently on scalloping has been more around the impact of scalloping and towed gear within marine protected areas. But scallops themselves, and I don't know where that feedback was from. Hopefully that wasn't me. So again, a lot of work to be done there. And in order to start that work, we actually need to do our own sampling. So one of the things we're going to start this year, and we were going to do it last year, is actually going scalloping with, not with St. Piran, but with Tiger Lily, our research vessel. Another netting management plan, another management plan is for netting, trying to bring together what is a huge piece of work, a huge subject, and a really complex one, and one we don't have any data for. So this is going to be massively challenging to try and do this piece of work. We currently don't have a netting permit like we have a shellfish permit, and we're going to have to think very carefully about how we do this. Marine protected areas, from 2013 to, I would say, probably about 2018, are probably about 60% of our work was marine protected area work. There was a change in the way that the government looked at the management of marine protected areas and the management of fishing within marine protected areas. And we were very clearly told there was an expectation on us to manage fishing activities. And God knows how many other colleagues would probably be able to tell me, but 25, 30 bylaws across the IFCAs to manage that. But that's still going on. We made our bylaws back in 2013. 5 years down the line, 7 years down the line, we've got to actually review these bylaws again. And that will be pretty controversial work. So we're starting with that, but also looking at the impacts of fishing on things like eelgrass. It's International Year of Eelgrass, so it's quite appropriate. And looking at some crayfish, which are a feature of some of our marine conservation zones. So those are at various stages of development, looking at options, looking at data, but that's a big piece of work. And the crayfish obviously then circles back to the crustacean shellfish management plan. So it's kind of linked because we already have crayfish bylaws. As I said, we manage the fowl, oyster and mussel fishery. There's surveys every year in February, and I'm really proud of my colleagues within our research team. During COVID, normally you would have 4 people, 5 people going out on that oyster survey. You saw the slide of it earlier. Couldn't do that. we could do a maximum of 2. So one very hard-working principal scientific officer and a skipper in the wheelhouse, and we COVID managed it. And in order to make that survey happen, Colin, who's responsible for it, purchased some software that enabled his team to sit in their houses, in wherever they live, and actually control some of the, gather the data and actually control the equipment on board Tiger Lily. So that survey was done, but also some of the MPA work and the video work I was showing you earlier, those stills. They are able now to actually use the technology so that the boat is on station and they are guiding the cameras and guiding the side scan from St. Just, Mabe, wherever they happen to be. So hell of a piece of work. But the Fallow Oyster Fishery, we've been doing some work with Port Health to do sampling of the queens at the moment. That was extra work that we did for them to help them out. And I think we'll be developing more in the fisheries management plan. And finally, bass. Our authority want us to look at bass because of the concerns that have been raised. So looking at what data we've got available and what that data would tell us about other options for management and how this would sit into wider management. So that's just to give you a bit of a flavour. That's the stuff that goes on, as well as all the stuff that normally goes on. So as well as the normal enforcement and research. And all of that stuff ultimately will go through me and my 2 senior officers. So there are times when people get in touch and they want to know why we haven't done stuff. We haven't done stuff because it's the same 3 people doing all of those things. So to bass. And the reason a lot of people have written in today, not written in, written into us also, but dialed in today and are watching. So I just wanted to go back and talk a little bit about bass and cover some of these points here. So I'm going to be looking at my notes a bit because I have got quite a lot of them. So at the moment, everyone's familiar that we are working within the emergency measures set out by the EU. And those have been in place since 2015, and they've changed since 2015. But essentially, there are the sort of parameters of bass entitlement set at an EU level. So we have a situation where there are allocations of catch limits, essentially, to hook and line, and then a unavoidable bycatch to nets and to trawls. And these are set annually at a European level, and the rules that we're sitting in at, subject to at the moment, are 5% unavoidable bycatch for trawls, 5.7 tonnes for hook and line, and 1.4 tonnes a year for gill nets, and of course something that you're all very familiar with, 2 fish a day for recreational sea angling. A lot of the emails we've received have been around this issue of unavoidable bycatch. And so when the measures came out initially, we put questions back to DEFRA and questions back to the MMO about, well, how do you define unavoidable bycatch? Well, you know, what is that? And it hasn't been defined. There's no way of pinning that down. And it makes it fairly useless as a tool, because you can't really take forward a prosecution because you can't define whether that bycatch should or shouldn't be there. And it sounds like semantics, and it's something that has concerned us ever since we first saw it. And talking to DEFRA about it, and I expect a lot of you will have read, not a lot of you, some of you will have read DEFRA's letter back to us in December 2020 on this subject, and DEFRA's conclusions were the same about this unavoidable bycatch. There had been proposals when it was first brought in the Commission about it being set at a particular level, but those were overturned. And moving forwards, I don't know what will happen with it at a commission level. That's still going on at the moment, and those discussions, as you're probably aware, are still happening between the EU and the UK. So we'll wait and see. There's no conclusions. Again, that's why partly why I phoned Defra this afternoon to see if they could tell me anything, and they regrettably couldn't. But they apologised for that and said sorry. It's getting really complicated for all species. So a lot of talk about illegal landings. A lot of people very concerned about what they would perceive as illegal landings of bass that aren't avoidable, as it were. If they're illegal or not comes back to whether they're exceeding these catch limits, because if you set aside the fact that the unavoidable bycatch is difficult to define, it essentially ends up being a catch allocation. So in terms of knowing whether a vessel has exceeded its allocation of landings for the year, that data is shared with the MMO. So that data comes into the MMO and then they assess it. They have a BAS tool. They look at it on a monthly basis. They do look at repeat landings and investigate them further, but that is very much within their area of work. And I think there's been some misconceptions that we might have access to that data, but we don't. That data comes in, and initially it used to come in through the registered buyers and sellers legislation. So essentially a lot of that data came in from third parties. And when it came in, it was often recorded against the default gear type for the vessels. So you'll understand, or I hope you understand that vessels will have allocations against their gear type. So they'll either have a netting allocation or a hook and line allocation or a trawl allocation. A lot of the smaller inshore vessels might have hand lines, a hook and line, and nets. So when the bass landings are being attributed to these vessels, quite often they'll be attributed to a default gear type, and that might not actually be the gear type that's being used. Moving forwards, beyond the registered buyers and sellers, there is the use of the catch app. So hopefully the data will get better, because that will record it against the gear type. So as the data moves forward and as the catch app becomes more populated, that should get better. But I think it shows in some of the sort of amalgamated and anonymized data for Cornwall in terms of landings. Landings figures in 2019, there was about 103 landings of 100% bass. But when you actually broke them down, about 50, just under 50% of them were less than 10 kilos, which to my mind speaks more of hand lining than it does of netting. So these are very small amounts of bass. And I think in a lot of cases, those 100%, not all of them, and I fully accept that, but a lot of them are very small, say 10, 20 kilos. They're probably misallocated from one gear type to another. But in any case, those small amounts of bass, a box here, a box there, are really valuable to the inshore fleet that are catching them. I think where a lot of the concern and a lot of the letters and emails we've received have been around where bigger landings have been observed. But all that landings data goes into the MMO and they analyse it. So if we want to see that data in exactly as yourselves, we have to ask for it. So we have to ask for it just like a Data Protection Act, like you do. We don't get like a special mates only service. We do what you do. I'm waiting for an application to be granted at the moment. It might not be. I know colleagues in another IFCA who asked for some data and didn't get it. So it's not a given. However, moving forwards, and what should be a lot more helpful in the future, is that all of the IFCAs are signing data sharing agreements with the MMO. We got our signed one back this week. So that is sort of gives us a framework where we can start working out how we share that data, because again, some of the emails that we've received, and I totally understand that frustration. It's like, well, you're in the same building as these people, how come you can't just have that data? Just go in and get it. I can't walk into their office and get it. I don't have access to it. But this data sharing agreement will eventually give us that access. So eventually we will have something like access to live catch data. I think it's some way off yet because of the complexities under the general data protection regulations about one organisation gathers something and then gives it to another one. You've got to be really careful about how that's done. So we do work very closely with the MMO in other ways. So we've been doing landings inspections. We make sure that we let them know we're not going to try and turn up at the same landings inspection. We've all been operating the last year within the realms of doing COVID work. So COVID risk assessment. So that has been more problematic. Lots and lots of people driving around on their own in vehicles and meeting up. It's not been easy. But we have been getting to landings, we have been seeing bass, we have been talking to people, and that work will go on. And that verification work of those landings is particularly important to the MMO because they need to reference that back to the data that they've received through things like the Catch app. Clearly, we can't see every landing in the same way we don't see every shellfish landing. We don't see everything that happens. You see some of them. Some of the other stuff that we talked have been questions around bass, have been around the use of bylaws to manage mesh sizes for bass. And this sort of harks back in some ways to the old EU technical conservation regulation 850/98, which is what we were working to for years. And that listed mesh sizes you could use for fixed and towed gears against the species that you could catch, and then a range of that you couldn't use at all. When the landing obligation finally came in, and you'll probably know that came in over a period of years in phases, that swept away a lot of that type of technical management. So the new Technicon legislation has removed most of these mesh sizes and fish sizes, and it's simplified it in order to make the landing obligation work. Now, we've adopted all that EU legislation, and then we have to work out which bits of it we're going to keep. Moving forwards, that will be interesting to see how DEFRA does that. And again, if you dialed into the APPG meeting, the all-party parliamentary group meeting today, there was talk about developing new technical conservation legislation. So that's going to be a really interesting process to see how that works. So at the moment, under the new EU reg, in this area, it's 120 mil mesh size, minimum mesh size. But you are able to use smaller mesh sizes for directed fisheries for dab, whiting, and hey presto, bass, just to complicate things. But you're not allowed to direct a fishery against bass because the EU measures say that you can't. So you end up getting in quite a difficult process there. It's always difficult also with mesh sizes to prove that a gear has been used to catch a box of fish that you're looking at if you can't see the net as well. Well, I wasn't using that net, I shot that net back. I haven't got that net, that's not the net I used. Whenever we're investigating an offence, looking at a landing, talking to people, you're always trying to think about how that jigsaw puzzle fits into place. So mesh sizes, those technical measures might get looked at again nationally. There's always the law of unintended consequences. If you make your meshes too big, you might start picking up species you hadn't intended to. If you say you can't have anything under a certain mesh size, then you're basically saying those fisheries can't happen. Now, I'm sure there are people listening who would be quite happy about that because your passion is for species that you see being caught by nets. But equally, and this is where being in an IFCA, you sit right in the middle of this. People earn their livelihood from this, and this is, this is back to Malcolm's question earlier about that balance and short-term pain and things. So mesh sizes, difficult, may not be effective, but the measures have changed. So we'll wait and see what happens in terms of some wider conservation, technical conservation measures nationally. Another conversation that we've had, and people have written to us about why don't you use bylaws to limit the percentage of bass that people can land? So say rather than 100%, they can only land 30%. And it sounds quite elegant. You think, well, that would work. That would be all right. That makes sense. Except again, the law of unintended consequences. It won't necessarily stop people fishing. What it could do is one of two things. Either people then start discarding, high grading, or in order to make up that 70% to match against their 30%, they actually have to put more gear in the water to have fish to make up the 100% in total. So again, it sounds like a really good idea, and I know that people have advocated for it because they think, well, that should work, but again, it isn't easy. It's not straightforward, unfortunately. I think with a lot of stuff with bass, if it was so easy, we wouldn't still be talking about it because it would have been done. So the measures that we are working under at the moment, the measures both with catch limits, however they're defined or whatever you call them, and also the ban on drift gear, has taken landings by netting down in 2013 from about 404 tonnes to about 120 tonnes. But DEFRA's view on this, and again the view they expressed to us in that letter that some people will have seen, and it's on our website. It's part of our committee papers from December 2020, so it's there if people want to see it. DEFRA were pretty clear in their own minds that a lot of the reduction and the benefit had been around drift net ban and catch limits, but they were less clear about, or less enthusiastic about, the unavoidable bycatch. So moving forwards, national and regional management, and actually EU management, because it's still relevant to us. We're still waiting for the outcome of the council meeting. We don't know what that's going to be like. Don't know whether there'll be different bass measures or not. Who knows? And I said I spoke to DEFRA, and it's pretty delicate. But also you have to think about bass in the context of the whole negotiation. So I think probably, again, some people here, Malcolm might be one, will have gone to some of those DEFRA meetings where the initial negotiating positions are set out, and you start hearing about all the species and some of the really big species, things like blue whiting, when you're talking hundreds of thousands of tonnes. So bass is actually quite a small stock in terms of the negotiation. So who knows when that's going to finish? But what it does do is, that will set the context of moving forwards. So that's kind of a bit of background, a bit about bass from kind of my perspective, and just trying to explain where the responsibilities for things lie, and we have responsibilities, and I understand that, but also maybe some misunderstanding or misconceptions about the data. And who has access to it and what you can do with it and why. But looking to the future, and again thinking about bass, but all other species as well. A new fisheries management regime under the Fisheries Act, and how's that going to land at the moment? We are going through the end of an unparalleled period in all of our lives, and trying to come out of the other side of that and recover. And there's been a lot of focus on recovery across the fishing industry in all its shapes and sizes. And that extends right the way across all of our communities. So the impact on commercial industry, the impact on the charter industry, the impact on you as individuals, as anglers, the impact on the people that you buy your bait and your tackle from, the B&Bs that you stay in. You know, the economy has been absolutely taken apart, and developing new fisheries management is going to sit within what's left and how quickly that bounces back. And you're, already hearing about funding mechanisms to support that. There's a £23 million fund for some very immediate concerns and losses, but there's also a £100 million fund coming to support the evolution of new fisheries management as well. And back to the very first question we had about how recreational sea angling sits within that, and also the industry that supports recreational sea angling in terms of all of the goods and services you buy as well. And funding cuts across all of this. We're all subject in the public sector to here we go, this is the cat coming in. I'm so sorry, she'll calm down in a minute. In terms of the spending review, the budget's going to be next week. We're currently on a 1-year spending review, and it'll be interesting to see whether we have another 1 year or 2 years. That will have an impact on us, because that's going to be the money that is available for us to manage, but also the money that's in the wider community. And then back to your rod licenses. The trade and cooperation agreement has all sorts of still threads to unwind, and again, listening to Secretary of State talking about it today, a lot of difficulties around it. It didn't land the way perhaps people hoped it was going to, maybe optimistically. So and that again then sets the context for the EU Fisheries Council, both the meeting this year, but the meeting every year for the next 5.5 years, while we position ourselves with the EU to find a way forwards. So bringing it back domestically, Fisheries Act, the next stages of that, the Joint Fisheries Statement, which is between the devolved administrations. So that's got to be done by next November. And the development of fisheries management plans. And I think therein lies an opportunity to look potentially at bass. It would be a good candidate for it, because fisheries management plans can be used to bring together everybody that's interested in a fishery. So here we go. This is Lely the cat. She's just turned up. Do you want to actually go and sit over there, my love? Go on, thank you. So, and out of this, then there'll be national fisheries legislation, because the Fisheries Act doesn't make everything happen. It just sort of sets a box in which other things can happen. So moving forwards, a lot of legislation coming. So my final slide, you'll be pleased to hear, because I've been talking a lot. It's sort of really about questions, really, to yourselves as much as anything else. As I've talked about several times today, we've been the subject of a lot of campaigns down here, because people have been angry and upset and disappointed. We've been told how dismissive and that we don't care. It's got quite extreme, some of that, and for our members it's got really quite difficult. So I understand the frustration and the passion behind it, but we need to find better ways of engaging with you, and that's a responsibility for ourselves and everybody out there. And I'd really like to know how we can do that better, both ourselves and everybody watching. Do online meetings work for you? I think it's for me it's interesting, because it enables us to talk to lots of people who wouldn't necessarily come to a meeting. Being a bit selfish, it means I don't have to dial up lots of village halls and try and find one that's got some parking, because believe me, that's harder than you'd think. But, you know, in all seriousness, does this kind of approach work? I'm really grateful to the Angling Trust for setting this up and doing all the behind the scenes work. You know, clearly we need to engage better. We need to work together better, because being subject to campaigns, and absolutely everybody's got the right to write in and say what they want, but the people that answer those questions and answer those emails are the same people that are measuring those scallops, measuring, you know, going out, recording that eelgrass, writing those bylaws, running those enforcement teams, worrying about the budget. It's the same three of us. It's only three of us do all that work. So it's just trying to put our efforts collectively, yourselves and ourselves, somewhere where we can see some benefit. And I touched on it a bit about reporting mechanisms. And it's something that Dave, who's on the line here, who I saw earlier, has raised with me locally about how we can better find a mechanism. Nevin and I had talked about this earlier, about whether there are national ways of solving this problem. We don't have an EA hotline number. We can't afford that, but what can we do? At the moment, if you phone us up out of hours, you'll get me, providing I'm awake, but I do have to sleep sometimes, so that's a bit difficult. But how can we make that better? How can we help you to help us in terms of information? And the very last point about data from angling, and I know this is a sensitive subject, and it's a subject that there's probably quite a lot of different views about. There's the mobile app that some people use, other people say, no, I'm not going to use that, and that's absolutely fine, because people are worried that we'll use data to harm them. And it's exactly the same conversation that we have with the commercial sector. I'm not going to tell you that, Sam, because you'll just bring in a bylaw to stop me doing it if I tell you that. And so we have to reply, well, if you don't tell me, I'm going to make some assumptions. So I think I've got an ask there, because I don't know the answer to this. But in terms of things like bass, bass is obviously really, really important. It's why a lot of people have dialed in today. But I couldn't tell you how much bass is caught through angling and where. I've got a vague idea, but I don't know that detail of that data. So I'll just leave that thought with you for now. I realise that we haven't got much time for questions. Nevin said earlier, could I go on a bit longer? Can we do sort of 10 minutes now, Nevin, if that's okay? My watch is saying it's about 25 past. So if we can say go to sort of 25 to just after. I do have to go and pick somebody up a bit later, so. But very happy to take some more questions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen now as well. My contact details are there. Nevin can have this presentation and share those details with you anyway.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. I'll hand straight over to Hannah. If Hannah's going to do 5 minutes of questions and from the type questions, and I'll be fair to a few people who put their hands up as well, and then do those, Sam, if you don't mind. So if everybody else could turn their cameras off, that would be great, please. Hannah, if you'd like to carry on.
Right, I'll see if I can get the cat to settle down over here. Go on, mate.
Thanks, Nevin. Just to let everyone know as well, we will make a note of these questions and forward them on to Sam afterwards, in case we don't get round to all of them because we're short of time.
Yeah, and there might be stuff that if there's technical stuff, I haven't got that in my head anymore. I would pass that on to our officers to answer that kind of thing. So yeah, please feel free to ask some questions, Hannah.
No problem. Thanks, Sam. We have a question from David Curtis, who asks, what is Cornwall IFCA going to do to stop netters targeting bass in Cornwall as they shoal ready to move to offshore spawning areas?
Well, this comes back to I suppose some of the issues that I talked about earlier about the complexity of the situation. Our committee has asked us to look at BAS. We need to disentangle what the data looks like and try and work out whether there are options that we can take in terms of management. But at the same time, I would also turn to my colleagues in the MMO with regards to the use of Catch app and the data that they gather in terms of enforcement, and also to DEFRA about what its ambition is for BAS and how that could be placed maybe within a fisheries management plan, maybe not, maybe within national or regional measures. Clearly, otherwise we're going to keep having this conversation every year. So yeah, we have a commitment through IFCA to start looking at it. And as I've explained when I showed you that sort of grey stripy list of things that we're doing, it sits alongside those other things. And it will be part of our plan moving forward. We do an annual plan every year, and it's going to be part of that. Hannah.
Thank you. I think we have time for just one more before passing over to Nevin. And Alan asks, where in the Cornwall IFCA enforcement risk matrix does the risk of recreational anglers contravening the BAS regulations rank compared with the ranking of commercial net-based BAS regulations being contravened?
The risk assessment, I could actually try and open that up and actually have a look at it, but the risk of the contravention of BAS regulations by recreational anglers is very low. Quite often we've come in for criticism that we don't actually board angling vessels. You know, why aren't you boarding us? We're like, well, because we know that you are much lower risk. So yeah, I can certainly direct you to it on our website, and it will set it out with in context against other fisheries. But yeah, one is higher, one is lower. I think the highest enforcement risk stuff that we've got is things like scalloping. That's a reasonably high. We've got quite a lot of regulation around scalloping. So the high points come in around things like scalloping vessels being in places that they shouldn't be. Hello, Nevin.
Hi, Sam. Thank you, Sam. The first person I'm going to invite to give you a question, Nick Tops. If you can turn your camera on and your microphone on, please. Nick, can you hear me? Can you turn your microphone on, your camera on?
Hi, Nevin. I can now. Thank you.
Oh, hello.
Hello, Sam. How are you doing?
I'm absolutely starving hungry, but other than that, I'm fine. How can I help you?
I appreciate that. Yeah. I had a question from the original lot, but actually what I would consider now more important. What about looking at putting GPS markers on nets for the commercials? Surely that would eliminate a lot of our confusion, or a lot of your confusion, when it comes to either judging whether those have been caught in which nets, or which, or when, in time and place, or which boats might have put them where they are. It'll appropriate them to a time and place so you can hold them accountable.
That's a really good question. So we talked earlier about IVMS, so the inshore vessel monitoring systems, and the way that those were originally set out would be that there would be a unit on the vessel, and then you could have sensors that sit on the gear. Now, very, very recently, we've been looking and we've been trialing essentially what are vehicle trackers. So you imagine all the vehicle fleets, rental fleets that are out there. We've been looking at those terrestrial vehicle trackers, which are literally like a little chunky mobile phone, magnetic, and they have one of their big uses is in the private detective industry when they're not being hurt, as you can imagine. So we've been we've bought one of these, and to answer your question, one of the things that comes with it as an add-on is gear sensors. So gear in, gear out. So you have the little unit on board the boat that's plumbed into all your electronics, and then the sensor sits on your gear. So this, well, because they were doing the oyster survey, they stuck the sensor on the oyster gear. And that instantly starts pinging. It talks to the receiver on the boat, and then the output will then show you whether, in that case, whether the dredge was in or out. So that technology is advancing all the time. I would say with sort of static gear, so potting and netting, if you look at a track from any kind of monitoring system, it's usually pretty clear where their gear is because of the way in which the track is laid out. You know, they'll go to an end, they'll pick an end up, they'll haul their gear, shoot back, and then go to their next gear. So experienced people can look at that data and say, well, you know, that looks like netting or that looks like potting. But yeah, it's an exciting area because I think we're just on the cusp of getting somewhere with that kind of information, and it's important not just from an enforcement point of view, but it's also for our colleagues that are doing the research work for us to establish the sort of density of fishing activity. So if you dial in next month to Matt and his team from Devon and Severn, they'll be able to talk to you about their inshore managing system and how they're using that data. But yeah, moving forwards, I think there's a lot of potential there. So thank you for your question.
Okay, thanks, Nick. If I could pass on now, two quick other ones. Greg Lewis, if you're able to ask your question, turn your camera on and do your microphone. Thank you.
Hello, Greg.
Hi there, Sam. I'd just like to ask you, Sam, do you agree that gill netting is one of the most barbaric and damaging methods of fishing, which also causes numerous deaths of other sea life, including cetaceans, seals, and seabirds, and that a move to a hook and line only bass fishery would actually demonstrate world-class leadership that was promised by the UK government post-Brexit?
Well, that kind of goes right to the heart of how we started out today, doesn't it, in terms of that kind of balance between different interests, and IFCA's being right at the sharp end of that balance. And yeah, there are problems associated with netting, certainly, and there are people that make their living from netting. So there's people that feel very strongly about being able to do it and their livelihood, and there's people that feel very strongly that it shouldn't happen. And as an IFCA, we have to pick our way between all of that. And you quite rightly also mentioned the other aspect of being an IFCA, which is looking at bycatch. So yeah, you mentioned cetaceans and birds and things as well. And that's the reason why we're looking at having a netting management plan, which is going to be a beast of a thing, to try and bring all that together, to look at the aspects of bycatch, look at the aspects of the importance of netting to those vessels that do it, and also the impact of that netting on vessels that target species in different ways. It's going to be really difficult, really difficult. And I think it's this, of all the things that we've done, this is the most difficult so far. I thought it was difficult when we looked at scalloping and MPAs, but this is on another level. So if I was talking to a group of netters, they would feel very passionately that they want to be able to do this. It's really important. I've sat next to people who've looked me in the eye and said, look, don't take my livelihood away from me. I can see from your perspective, somebody who, you know, in your opinion, quite rightly, from what you've experienced, is about why can't there be a hook and line fishery for this species? As an IFCA, we've got to find a way through that process. We've got to find a way through netting management over the next probably about 5 years. I'm going to be a lot grayer by the end of that. It's bloody difficult work, all I can say.
Well, thanks for your answer. I'd just like to add, I think that perhaps there's potential there for it could be it could work for the for netters to move to hook in line, in the sense that obviously it's a far more sustainable practice with better fish care, and you can be far more selective and in sizing the fish that you're catching, and no reason for discarding undersized fish, and which would also probably add value to their catch, which would obviously, you know, be a plus for them.
And certainly we have a strong handline fleet down here, the Southwest handliners. So and you know, marketing of bass caught by handlining. So yeah, it's it goes right to the heart of what we're going to be doing over the next I would say 4 or 5 years, if I last that long. Do you have another question? Nice to meet you, Greg.
Great.
One last question.
Thanks,
yeah, one last question. Doug Hurdson. Doug, if you
Hello,
like
Doug. I saw you there.
Yep.
Hi, Doug. Nice to see you.
Hi, Doug. Are you able to turn your microphone on your camera? Hello, Doug. Are you still there?
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
Hi, Doug.
Hi there. Nice to hear you, Sam.
It's nice to see you too. I haven't seen you for ages.
I hadn't actually put in a question. I don't know where that came from, but.
Well, you had your hand raised, Doug, so I assumed you had a question.
Oh, sorry.
Not a problem. Not a problem. Look, that's
just to say that, by the way, the Southwest Marine Ecosystems, we're doing our annual report, and I'd be very interested in receiving any reports of unusual fish from around the Southwest for last year, and particularly any turtles. Normally we get about 12 turtle reports a year. Only had 2 last year, one from East Devon and one from Briar. So
okay.
There goes a call for help from Doug, and that
Doug.
list makes a fascinating reading every year when you see it. And you know, I think in terms of anglers, quite often you're the first people to encounter new species, and often your familiarity with seeing those species again and again makes you point out some of the finer details that and then you send them off to Doug and he identifies them. So, but lovely to see you, Doug. Take care.
We had Atlantic croaker from off South Devon at the end of last year, first one ever for Britain, and we don't always come across from the Atlantic, or from a population that's building up in the North Sea around Belgium and Holland that came over in ballast water. So
gone straight to Devon.
Yeah.
Okay, Doug. Thank you. Thank you for that, and thank you to. Okay, we're going to wrap up the evening now. So look, firstly, thank you to Sam. Thank you for presenting. Thank you for being so candid with us as well, and to for answering the questions that have been posed. As I mentioned to everybody earlier, you know, a lot of people have written questions down, and we'll be putting those into a document sent to Sam, and Sam has agreed that she would provide answers to us.
Can I just manage expectation on that? I've got a bit of a hellish week next week with report writing, so I will answer questions, but it's going to take me a minute or two to do that. So if you don't get something directly back from Nevin, please bear with me. Nevin will be on my case to do it.
No, don't worry. Look, just to reassure you, for everybody, these go on a Q&A document that we'll attach to the recording, so there is going to be no rush with this, Sam. It's as and when you can. Obviously appreciate how busy you are, but as long as we let everybody know they come in, and what I'll do then is when they do go out, I'll make sure that everybody who's attended tonight is receives the link to look at that. But you've only got to look at the Angling Trust website on the C page, and you'll see that there. So look, thanks again, Sam. Look, feedback's really important for us, for all of you that have attended tonight. We're going to be in touch about that, and it's really important that we hear from you, please. So what else would you like us to cover in the forums? It's really important you tell us, please. And look, you can find out about everything that we are doing on a few forums. We're doing monthly forums, as Sam mentioned already, on the IFCAs. So the next one is Devon and Severn IFCA with Matt Mander in a month's time. So please, if you're interested, I'm sure people like Doug will be attending that. Interested to see what you got to say. But you can always find out about everything that we're doing by signing up for our free newsletter. Now, I noticed earlier on when I had a quick check that about 2/3 of the people that are attending tonight were members of the Angling Trust. Others of you weren't. You can sign up for the C newsletter free. You don't have to be a member, but of course we would always welcome you to join us, and it doesn't cost a lot of money really, and after all, if you're a sea angler, you don't have to pay for a rod license, so you got the odd 30 quid. Join us in the Angling Trust, please. The next forums we're going to be running actually is on the 11th of March, where we continue in the shark theme, and if you've not seen the Blue Shark forum from last week, it is available now on the Angling Trust website. And the next one is going to be spotlighting on poor beagles. And then, as I said, 25th of March, it's Matt Mander and the Devon and Severn IFCA, and we will be working our way around the coastline. As I say, we've got others planned. Please do sign up for the newsletter. You will get to see all of them on there. Please note, I know some of you had some real issues about getting into the meeting this evening. We are going to be moving to a more webinar-based approach, which may make it will hopefully make it much easier, and will link directly through Eventbrite in the way that a lot of you are used to when you log into these events. So hopefully it'll be much better for all of you. As I said, please check out the C section of the Angling Trust website. It's everything's available on there. You'll see what we're doing at the moment. Thanks again to everybody that attended tonight.
Thank you.
We hope to see you here, and thank you for coming, Sam. And you've been the first. You've almost been the guinea pig for your colleagues in the IFCAs, so no doubt they will feed back to you. But it's been brilliant. We appreciate that everybody would have had lots of questions they could have asked, but we think an hour-and-a-half event on an evening has got to be better than EastEnders, Coronation Street, and it does give people an opportunity. So thanks once again, Sam, for taking part tonight. Thanks for everybody.
Thank you for the
attending.
opportunity as well, and yeah, think of all the carbon we've saved, hopefully. So not driving to places, but no, thank you. And I've seen some comments coming in, and thank you for those as well. So yeah,
Okay, see you again soon. Thanks for your
yeah,
efforts.
and thanks for your support as well, Nevin. All right, take care.
Right.
Good night,
everybody.
everybody. Bye bye.